Thank you for joining us for another edition of Jackman Radio. I am joined today by Mr. John McCarthy. How you doing today, John?
Good. I'm doing good, Mike. Thanks
Good.
for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. And I've actually known John for many years. I grew up with two of his sons, Luke and Mike. We were very similar in age and went to school together. And, Mike reached out and said you were running and, we kind of discussed the podcast a little bit, and he was on before. So we were like, well, why don't we have, your dad on to talk about the campaign? And you're running for state rep for District 18, which would cover Jaffrey, Rindge, and Dublin, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And I got a little biography here, a little background. Mr. McCarthy is retired from Water Resources, and he is a member and current chair of the Jaffrey Rindge School Board. He's a member and youth exchange officer of Jaffrey Rindge Rotary and a former member of the Jaffrey Planning Board. Mr. McCarthy is also a member of the St. Patrick Parish in Jaffrey, and he served 2 years in the U.S. Peace Corps in Guatemala, and he worked on community development in Colombia, Bolivia, and Iraq. And Mr. McCarthy has lived in Jaffrey, New Hampshire for 30 plus years. And he's married to a Conant High School language teacher who I also had in high school for Spanish, Senora McCarthy. Hola. John is the parent of 3 sons who are all educated in Jaffrey Rindge, Conant graduates like myself, and he's the grandparent of 4. And some of the issues you have here for your John McCarthy for New Hampshire State Rep include defending public education and supporting educators, supporting clean energy and protecting natural resources that make New Hampshire a healthy and enjoyable place in which to live, and to make New Hampshire welcoming for all who seek a thriving place where they can live and work. So that's a little bit of your background from your Facebook, John McCarthy for New Hampshire State Representative. So, going into it, what kind of prompted you to want to run? Because I think this might be the first time I've seen your name on the ballot here for something like this.
Yes, it sure is. I like to tell people that, I've considered it in the past. I've actually been asked a few times if I would run. But like about everybody else who's asked, I had good reasons to not want to do it. It's a hard job, takes some dedication if you want to do it right. Doesn't pay. I think it's $100 a year, and it's it's not an easy job. It can be difficult. So there's always good reasons, good excuses, right? You have your family to take care of, your business interests, your home, and this year, I kind of watched. I've told a few people this story, but I went to the Martin Luther King Day presentation online. It was done at the Park Theater, but it's sponsored by the United Church of Jaffrey. And they've done a great job over the past, I think it's about 5 or 6 years they've been doing it now. In any case, the keynote speaker at the event was a fellow named Jim Waller. And he's from the Holocaust Center over in Keene State, at Keene State University. And he was talking about democracy and how we're kind of in a dangerous place. And he's pointed out that it's at the state level that the danger really exists, more than the national level even, because many of the state houses have gone over to the Republican Party. And, he wasn't talking so much down on Republicans, but he was pointing out that there's a segment of the Republican Party that's gone pretty far right, pretty far off the spectrum. And there's quite a few people who don't really believe in the rule of law, or who question whether the rule of law should be, what runs things. And, it wasn't the first time I've heard anything about that. We've all heard about January 6th. And some of us think it was a more serious event, and others think, well, it was, not as serious as some make it out. There's a range of opinions on that. But we know that that wasn't the only incident in America where there's been civil unrest, and some of it's gotten pretty violent in recent years. And for older people like myself, who can't help but think back to the years before we were born, when when the World War II happened, and the Holocaust, and the craziness that went on in Germany, a lot of us look back at it and say, what went on there? How did that happen? Because Germany was a civilized country, right? I mean, a really civilized country. It was at the peak of music and the arts and scientific achievement. It had a lot going for it. So if a country so advanced could go so off the rails, you know, what protects any country? So like I say, a lot of us who get to my age, who have maybe time to think back on these things, you know, I've been reading books and taking classes about what happened in those times and how did things go off the rails. And so hearing this fellow from Keene State talk about New Hampshire, it made me realize that, yeah, all the good excuses for not running were maybe not good enough, and that I should consider stepping up to do something. And what I decided to do was to try and help find a candidate, because I thought I could think of quite a few people that I thought would be great. And so I got on a small committee with a couple of other people, including current rep Dick Ames, and including Jeff Tickler, who is my running mate. And we surfaced about 15 names, maybe 20 names, and contacted a dozen of them at least to see if they'd be willing. And a number of people considered it, but no one was able or willing to step forward. And so me and Jeff decided to run.
Wow. So yeah, you hear that a lot sometimes, where people are looking for candidates and then they end up they do it themselves, or they end up kind of by default being the ones to put themselves out there. Yeah, it's as we were saying before we went on the air. My brother Eric ran back in 2012, and another thing we've kind of come up against is the whole idea of parties. I'm not a very party-oriented person when it comes to politics. You know, when I was younger, I would have considered myself more of a Democrat, but after the 2004 election, I was very disappointed with what happened in Ohio, and that Kerry and Edwards didn't really contest it. And so I kind of became an independent and have kind of been an independent since then, but I've supported candidates from different parties if they line up kind of with what my big views are on what I think are the big important issues. And one of the things I think on your platform too is keeping taxes low in New Hampshire and property tax, because that's certainly something that has been an issue here in the state, because we don't have the sales tax, and we enjoy a pretty low tax overall. But what's your take on that?
Well, that's a great question, and I think that's a very important question. I think I mentioned to you in an email I sent that I was concerned about local issues and things that are happening that are affecting us locally, as well as kind of the environment that we create here and how it feeds into the national environment, right? But on the local level, yeah, property taxes are always rising, and they're rising too fast. And the state has, in my view, a lot of the responsibility for that. And the Republicans have been in power more than the Democrats. And when they are in power, they have done what they can to push policies that have raised our property taxes. And it's kind of interesting that the Republican Party always attacks Democrats for voting for an income tax, which we all know is never going to happen here in New Hampshire. We're not going to get an income tax. We really don't believe that that's going to happen. But I remember 2 years ago when the Senate flipped from the Democrats to the Republicans in 2020, that like a day before the election or 2 days before the election, signs mysteriously appeared telling voters that Gene Deitch, the senator for this area at the time, that she supported an income tax. And it was, what's a nice way of putting it, was a dirty trick, you know. But the fact is that our property taxes are what we're all paying, and what's driving some people to leave their homes or not be able to meet their other expenses because they're paying those taxes. Well, in 2018 to 2020, when the Democrats were in power, they added additional money for lower income communities. And that is to say, communities where the property value per student is low. And I don't know how much you would follow this or how much any citizen follows these kind of issues. But here in New Hampshire, we have communities where there's $4 or $5 million in property valuation per student that they have to fund. And then there's other communities where the property valuation per student might be $800,000. Now, if you're in one of those $800,000 communities or $900,000 or $1 million per student property valuation communities, every extra $1,000 you have to pay adds a significant burden to your property tax. If you're in one of the communities where you've got $5 or $6 million in valuation per student, then you can have a pretty high cost education without raising your property taxes very much. So there are grants that the state has traditionally provided to try and help lower income communities. And one of them is called an adequacy grant. In 2019, 2018-19, the Democrats got into the budget some assistance for adequacy grants, which directly helped Jaffrey and Rindge. But last year, or in the last session, 2020 to 22, the Republicans stripped it out in the budget bill. They also put in a voucher bill. Now, the voucher bill, they said, was going to be, fairly reasonable in cost, and it ended up costing, some people say, 40 times what it was budgeted at. Now, the vouchers go to help people who want to send their kids to private schools, including religious schools. But it turned out that most of that money went not to kids who wanted to go to private schools or to families, that is, who wanted to send their children to private schools. But instead, it went to people who were already sending their children to private schools. Now, you can argue about whether religious schools should be funded by state taxes. It seems like our Constitution says they shouldn't. But the big thing is, why should our property taxes go up so that that can happen? And so when you combine the eliminating of the adequacy aid, the creation of this voucher program, which was, as I say, up to 40 times more expensive than it was claimed it was going to be in its first year. And then on top of that, you look at the downshifting of costs to local communities, to municipal governments. You're seeing a very big impact on property values. That is property taxes, which in turn affects property values, right? The higher the taxes, the less desirable the land. Well, what do I mean by downshifting? Well, costs that the state previously paid, they started cutting. things like retirement benefits and contributions to health insurance. They started cutting those back when the financial crisis hit in 2008, right? Back when gasoline prices were even higher than they are now.
I remember I was in college. They were almost $5 a gallon when W was president at the time.
Yeah. So, when you take all these things into account, our property taxes have been going up, and almost all the policies that my Republican colleagues, I shouldn't call them colleagues because I'm not a member yet, right? But they're Republican representatives, my neighbors, that they've been supporting. I don't know how they affect the richer communities, over in some of the communities closer to the coast and some of the larger communities. Maybe these policies work well for them, but they're sure not working well for Jaffrey and Rindge and Dublin.
Right, for regular people who are, trying to make ends meet. And you mentioned gas prices, worry about really high gas prices, the cost of heating. I mean, everything else that goes into what you got to pay for in this life, Yeah, I think anything that can be done, whether it's a Democratic proposal or a Republican proposal to ease that and to help people with education, and with healthcare, I think that's a good thing. It's unfortunately you don't really ever see anything come of it. I mean, something that happened when I was living in Rindge some years ago that I thought was great, that actually brought a lot of people together, was everybody locally in their opposition to the Kinder Morgan pipeline. That was, that was something that affected everybody, no matter what party you were. If you're going to have this, this thing going through your property, you're like, oh, I don't want that. Republicans didn't want it, Democrats didn't want it. And a lot of us came together on that issue, and I really saw a lot of unity. So, I mean, what issues do you think could really bring people together? Because it does seem like we are very divided right now in our country, and even at a local level, we kind of are too. But I always feel at the end of the day, we hear extremes from both sides. They get amplified the loudest, and you can't just have like a regular conversation without things getting heated or devolving into name calling or, the spectacle that's kind of become our American politics. So, I don't know. What do you think can galvanize people locally to come together and put aside partisan differences?
I think a little common sense and mutual respect, listening to each other. I don't think that either side of the aisle has all the answers. I also, consider myself more of an independent than a Democrat. I switched over to I've been a Democrat before. Usually after I vote in the primary, I switch back to independent, not always. But this year I did have to switch to the Democratic Party. I wanted to run as a Democrat. I'm proud to be running as a Democrat. But I was registered as independent up until early June. And part of the reason is I know that neither side has all the answers, and both sides are able to make mistakes. And a lot of people in both parties have been affected by the Trump presidency and driven a little bit batty by it, And on one side, you have people who don't care what the former president does or says; they still want to support him, no matter how wrong the things are that they might hear from him. And then on the other side, you have people who are convinced that anybody who ever voted for Trump, that they must be evil or insane. And they know that's not true, but they can't quite figure out how to deal with the fact that their neighbor, who they've known for decades and who they respect and who they wouldn't hesitate to help if they could, is also somebody who believes the complete opposite from them. So, I think we need to start talking more. And I know conversations can be difficult, but I think, it's so easy to say talking, but it's really about listening, maybe more than talking. Because if you're going to talk to someone, you have to be willing to listen to them too. And, common sense solutions is what we need. And trying to find what's the best way forward? I've enjoyed being on the school board for the last 6 years. And it has not been an easy period in a way, but I've enjoyed the way people have tried to sort through problems. And we're not always right. We make mistakes. I, I hate to say it, but that is, in fact, a very big piece. We're human beings, whether Democrats or Republicans or independents. Not everything we decide is going to be the right decision. We do the best we can. And some days, boy, do we feel lucky that things went okay. And other days we think, wow, we tried our best. But I always think it's amazing what people accomplish, what we human beings, we Americans accomplish, despite being human, and bringing with it all the flaws that are entailed in being human. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think a really interesting part of your resume too, and something I've always been fascinated about. I don't think I've ever been able to ask you, was your time doing community development in Iraq, and you also did that in Colombia and Bolivia. And I think I remember you went to Iraq maybe around 2005 or six or something like that.
Yeah, 2005.
What was that experience like, and what did you learn from that you could bring to this and your perspective on your time in Iraq?
Well, I learned there's good people everywhere. I learned that there's some real problems with our media and the way we educate ourselves. It's one of the reasons I'm a real opponent of the divisive concepts law that was passed also by the Republican legislature this last term. You know about that, right?
What's that one all about? No, I don't know that I'm familiar with that one.
Well, the divisive concepts law says that teachers are not allowed to teach students about concepts that could be considered divisive. And if they do, they can be held accountable by parents who identify them as having taught divisive concepts. Things like slavery and who's to blame for slavery. And, well, to tell you the truth, it's not too clear what.
Yeah, it sounds kind of vague. Yeah, it sounds like it could be misconstrued as pretty vague.
It is pretty vague, and there have been serious efforts on the part of the ACLU and the teachers' unions and others to try and have that law defined and clarified. And those efforts have been rebuffed by the governor and by his secretaries, the people who work for him, Secretary of Education. They're not interested in defining it because having it unclear is actually beneficial to them.
Right, can be more broadly covered.
There's a group out there, I think they're called Mothers for Liberty. And they have a $500 bounty that they've been offering for any parent who finds a teacher teaching something divisive and gets that teacher fired, gets the teacher's license revoked. A lot of people don't know that was passed into law. But that's kind of an example of, well, I'd say two things. One, that many things are left unclear and confusing purposely, because if it's confusing, just like this district I mentioned to you, that one of the people that I'm running against is in a district that includes 6 communities, all the way from Roxbury to Fitzwilliam, including Rindge and Jaffrey and Dublin. Now we have a Senate seat that goes all the way from Bedford over to Hinsdale.
So lots of gerrymandering going on.
Yeah.
It sounds like quite often.
Yeah, and the gerrymandering is an issue. Republicans have done their very best. I'm sure the Democrats have done the same thing nationally in their time, but a lot of things are left unclear. So that's, yeah, that's one thing. And Yeah, this notion of divisive concepts is it curtails our freedom. It keeps us from speaking out, and I'll tell you the truth. I think I lost my train of thought there. There was something.
Oh no, yeah, we were just talking about what topics that might be. I mean, just from national news stories that you've heard that I've paid attention to, it's probably related to sex ed or stuff with gender or what sex ed looks like for when you're in middle school or high school. I mean, I'm thinking back to we had independent living with Mrs. Pride, and that was very interesting to say the least. But I graduated high school in 2005, so I don't know. I'm not sure what it looks like, nowadays in high school. I know Mrs. McCarthy just retired, last year, a year or two ago.
Yeah,
so
2020, June of 2020.
So yeah, just over 2 years ago. So, I think there's probably people on the other side who are saying, "Oh, I don't want my kids, told about these subjects or taught a certain way about this." So maybe they're more inclined to send their kids to a private school if they can. But like to speak to what you said, if you're an educator, then now you got to be fearful about, oh, am I going to teach them a book or a subject that is going to offend a parent and there's going to be a crusade against me? So that's where you can.
These are very tricky questions.
Yeah.
And I think parents have every right to be involved and be concerned about the
Absolutely.
education of their children. But I think, too, we need to trust our teachers and support education. I was talking earlier about the impact on property taxes. And I think that people should look into that, because I think they'll find there's a lot of truth to what I said about what the Republican legislature's been doing. But what ends up happening, of course, is that we then still have to fund our public schools. And so the public schools look for more money and they end up having their budgets cut, like what happened this past year. But Mike, I'm not trying to avoid that topic. None of us really know, I don't think, where this gender fluidity came from. Or at least, maybe I'll speak for myself. It seemed to me like it just came out of nowhere, And of course, I've always, known that not everybody is heterosexual, right? There's gay people, and there's been a move towards recognition that people are born gay and that they have a right to be gay, and that they should have full rights. And that wasn't how it felt or what we were taught when I was a young guy, right? When I was in school. So I've had to learn, all of us in my generation have had to learn, I think, or at least many of us have had to learn, to respect people and to treat them with decency. But the whole gender fluidity is sort of like another thing. And parents, I think, are concerned. They certainly don't want their children going to school and being encouraged to consider their gender.
Right. Yeah, that is a more recent phenomenon. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
It's okay. It is more recent, and I think that our teachers are very sensitive to that. They're not going in and teaching kids that it's okay to switch genders or encouraging them. What they do is try to protect those children who are questioning their gender for whatever reason, and make sure that they're not being bullied, that they're not the butt of jokes, that they're being treated with respect, and that they have a safe place to learn. And teachers are human too, right? Just like we hear about cases of police who do things that they shouldn't do, and religious leaders who do things they shouldn't do. But teachers, by and large, on the whole, are very conscious of their responsibilities to parents as well as students. They are well supervised. In our district, I believe they're well supervised by the administration. They know what they're supposed to teach and not teach. And they're left with the responsibility to figure out how to help students kind of walk this tightrope or navigate this complex trail in a new era. And what is
Yeah.
a new era? Well, it's all this stuff coming forward that we don't know where it came from.
Well, I mean, it's a cultural shift. I mean, you see a lot of it in the media. A lot of it's in shows on Netflix. A lot of it is certainly being promoted. Bill Maher had an interesting segment recently on one of his shows where he examined how it is in California versus other parts of the country, and a lot of the numbers that were dramatically different. So he's more inclined to believe that a lot of it's a fad. I don't know. I don't really focus on a lot of it too much, but it is something teachers have to deal with. I mean, a lot of my friends are teachers. My mom has been working in a school for 20 years, and they've all been faced with these issues. And yeah, it's like walking a tightrope, and you're asking a professional who doesn't make a lot of money to begin with, and oftentimes spends their own money to buy supplies for the classroom and does all kinds of work outside of the classroom that people don't even see, to prepare for that experience, to take on a whole other layer of it. So yeah, I don't know, there's a lot with that. But switching gears from education to energy, I know you say that clean energy is part of your platform. How do you think, in New Hampshire, and more specifically around Jaffrey, Rindge and Dublin, we can benefit from clean energy, and what does that look like?
Well, locally, I think supporting solar power and doing what we can to use renewables is something we can do. But really, the biggest impact we can have is at the state level. New Hampshire has been dragging its feet and slow walking the movement towards renewables. And it's kind of a shame because we've been known as a state of innovators. We have a lot of smart people here, a lot of business people, like the people that created New England wood pellets. Not an easy thing to do. Steve Walker understood what the requirements were. He worked with the DES. DES regulates very well. They very tightly wanted to make sure that there were not going to be emissions that were damaging to the local environment. And he was able to navigate that process and create an amazing business that is providing, heating using biomass for, I don't know, tens of thousands of people, or is it hundreds of thousands of people? I think probably more like hundreds of thousands, right? So we have a lot of people like that, though, in New Hampshire, and they know that renewables are the future. And that doesn't mean that you stop using fossil fuel in the meantime, but it does mean that you encourage the forward movement and you look to get those jobs here, because there are going to be a lot of high-paying jobs in the green economy, and we could use some of those jobs here. So,
yeah, definitely. I mean, like you're saying, it's not going to be something that's going to be overnight, but I mean, certainly a lot of these organizations and politicians out there who've been talking about this for years. If we started a while ago, I think we'd be even further, on it. But unfortunately, you have a lot of lobbyists and special interests that are not in favor of that. But we do live in reality. I mean, we all drive cars, so we all contribute to, the fossil fuel situation, and we certainly have our relationship with countries like Saudi Arabia, which is very, very tricky to navigate because they are involved, with a lot of unscrupulous activities, and but they're one of the largest providers of energy in the Middle East. So we have to live in that reality. But yeah, I mean, I think going forward, it's a great idea to invest in different energy resources, and keep that more localized.
Mike, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
What's your take on climate change and on the danger that we face as not only as a nation, as a species? What's your
Well,
take?
I mean, I think it's certainly a very big issue. One should be one of the top ones. That right now I'm more focused on nuclear war popping off, because I think that's closer in my lifetime than it's ever been since '62 when Kennedy was president. But I mean, I remember seeing the footage and pictures of the ice caps melting in real time, and seeing the melting of the ice caps, the recession over the years. You can just see the maps. I mean, it's, it's clear as day to see that there is an impact going on, and you have wildfires raging all over the world, people being displaced because of severe weather. So I think it's a hugely important issue. Unfortunately, it has been politicized, and you have people denying it completely, saying it doesn't exist at all. And then you have others you got someone like Al Gore talking about it. Meanwhile, he lives in a big mansion that probably probably takes, how much energy to fuel and run. So I do think it is very important. I haven't focused on it as much recently, to be honest, because like I said, the whole nuclear situation's been more on my mind. But I definitely agree and think it's real and it's important.
It's interesting. It's one of those things that goes back to the divisions and the divisiveness, where people on the right and people on the left can't talk to each other.
Yeah.
There's a lot of denial going on, and it's easy to see the denial tied to political views.
Or if they're taking money from the coal lobby, or what energy lobby are they taking money from to have a certain view? I think that's attached to it a lot too. If they're in the pockets of, Exxon or whichever energy company pays for their votes or funds their reelection campaigns,
I guess there's always going to be corruption. We are human, but there probably needs to be a lot less of it if we're going to solve some of the problems confronting us as a species.
Yeah.
If we want to see the next generation and the generation after that have a chance at survival, we're going to have to get some things right. Like we have in the past as Americans. We've gotten some things right, and we can do it again. But if we don't talk to each other, if we don't trim the corruption and make our politicians believe again in being honest, and honesty being the norm, then we're going to have climate denial and all sorts of denial. And I agree with you about the war, or the danger of nuclear war. I think we all should be concerned about that. But this climate crisis is coming along, and even if we get past this current conflict between Russia and NATO, or Russia and the U.S., however you want to describe it, the climate problem is going to be with us, and looks like it's getting worse. And I think, sometimes people exaggerate the seriousness of these things, and sometimes they understate the seriousness because they don't want to sound like Chicken Little claiming that the sky is falling,
Right.
But
or like an alarmist.
Yeah, an alarmist, right. But there's lots of reason to believe that this climate problem is persistent and serious, and at least in my view, I think we need to start talking to each other, because getting past politicians, that's one thing, but the average person, I think, is in a little better position, not being into the whole lobbying game, and they're looking at how much it costs them to fill up their tank, and if they're being encouraged to buy an electric vehicle, they want to know, what's an electric vehicle going to do for me if I get stuck in a snowstorm and my battery runs out? I mean, they've got concerns, and they're not about lobbyists and bribes. Their concern is what's going to work. And
yeah,
people need to be able to talk to each other, because in the absence of honest conversation, we get conspiracy theories. We have conspiracy theories on the right and conspiracy theories on the left, and it's not helping us.
Yeah, I mean, the average person, they're going to vote with their wallet, and like we were saying before, with all the pain at the pump, I mean, that's a very real thing. And after you work your 40, 50 plus hours a week, and let's say you have kids and you have a family to deal with, and all these problems, the last thing you're going to want to do is probably try to look into these issues with a little bit of free time that you have. And I've heard that argument from a lot of people, and I totally get that. But yeah, something like nuclear annihilation or climate change, I think, unfortunately, until it's in a lot of people's faces directly, they don't think about it or don't want to deal with it. But for me personally, I think just, in your everyday life, anything you can do to think about what your footprint looks like, or what your actions are, doing to the planet. And there's actually a great documentary coming out by Abby Martin from Media Roots. She's an independent journalist who I respect very greatly. And she's focusing on the pollution from the Pentagon. She's claiming that the Pentagon is one of the world's largest polluters. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. So, certainly our footprint around the world and the militarism and wanting to, insist on being in all these countries, that has a huge, impact that I don't think ever really gets discussed in earnest.
Good points, Mike. Good points.
So, but yeah, there's a lot of issues, but I think it was Tip O'Neill said all politics is local. So we're coming up on almost just over 41 minutes. So I want to be respectful of your time. I know you got another event you're attending here today, John?
That's right. Right. But I'd like to jump out of here in about 4 minutes if we can do that. Is there any last thing that you'd like to ask about, or?
Well, just give your, I don't want to say elevator pitch, but when you're on the stump or you're talking to people, what do you kind of lead with, and what do you say if you got a couple of minutes of someone's time to why they should support you in your campaign?
Okay. Well, thanks. I think this is a great year to vote Democrats up and down the list. I think Governor Sununu is going to be tough to beat, but Tom Sherman would be a great governor, and I think that we should vote for Maggie Hassan. We should vote for Melanie LeVesque and Matt McLaughlin, but especially we should vote for Jeff Dickler and John McCarthy. And the reason I think that is because we've gone too far over to the extreme. And I really think it's a problem for all of us, not just for people on the Democrat side. This attack on women's rights. I'm sort of a religious person. I still go to church. I'm the only one in my family probably that does that. But I do it because I'm trying to remind myself always that I don't have all the answers, and I need to look inside. I need to ask God for help. And the churches have been big on overturning Roe, the Roe decision, and making abortion not a guaranteed right for women. And I think that's a shame, because I think the churches, including my church, maybe in particular my church, could do a lot more to change hearts and minds instead of trying to change the laws. I do think that the abortion restrictions that were passed last year are going to become more restrictive this year if the Republicans retain power in the House and the Senate, because they've done what they can to primary more moderate Republicans. I mean, I don't know how many people know this, but there is an exception to the New Hampshire abortion law for cases of rape or incest. Well, those exceptions are in there because Republicans joined with Democrats to insist that that amendment be passed. Almost all of those Republicans who voted for that were primaried, and the majority of them lost their seats. So that's one of my pitches. And another part of my elevator pitch is I think we need to talk to each other. And I've been saying that since we started talking. It's not, the problem isn't Trump voters. The problem isn't the LGBTQ community or the socialists, as some Republicans like to call Democrats. That's not the problem. The problem is that people aren't treating each other as fellow citizens when it comes to politics, and we're not respecting each other the way we need to. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. Well, that well said. I really appreciate that, John, and I agree. I like to have people on that I agree with and people that I disagree with, or learn something, perspective I never even considered or thought of before. And I guess that's my contribution to this whole thing. I've been podcasting for several years, and I'm going to, continue doing it and having conversations like this. So I thank you very much. I thank you for your time, and I wish you good luck on the trail.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
All right. Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of Jackman Radio. We will be back again soon.